So my name is John McAuliffe and I direct the Creative Manchester Research Platform. And what we do is we support interdisciplinary research here at the University of Manchester, which engages with creativity in one aspect or another. And one of our themes is civic and creative futures. And in fact, if you take out your phones and point it at that QR code, you will be taken to a link which will allow you to sign up to our fantastic newsletter. So I don't see any of you taking your phones out here. But anyway, please do. Thank you, Abby. Because we do like to tell everybody about what it is that we do. But in that theme, two of our great allies over the last 4 years have been Luthfur Rahman and our chair tonight, Abby Gilmore. And I'm going to introduce them in a minute. I'm going to say a couple of other things before that. This is done in partnership with another one of our partners, the Oxford Road Corridor Group, and it's part of the Cultural Welcome. And as you may know, this is a week of events. I believe that there is sauerkraut making in the Castlefield Gallery tomorrow night. And there are lots of other events going on for returning students or for anybody involved with any of the higher education institutions along the Oxford Road Corridor. And it's also in collaboration with Manchester Urban Institute. And we're delighted that Karen Lucas and her team have been such, again, good colleagues of ours in events and are supporting this event with us tonight. I also have to tell you that there are no fire alarms scheduled. And if there is a fire alarm, you'll see our colleagues and our Creative Manchester colleagues will point you towards the exit if a fire alarm does occur. And my last bit of admin is that we are recording this entire event for a podcast tonight. So, you know, there will be time for questions afterwards. So you may be recorded, and just to make sure that you're happy with that as well. And if you're not, please let us know afterwards. So, our chair tonight is Professor Abby Gilmore. Abby is Professor of Cultural Policy at the University of Manchester in the Institute for Cultural Practices. Since her PhD on popular music, cultural policy and urban development, she has connected culture, policy and place in any number of arenas. In AHRC-funded work on the Millennium Dome, on an ESRC study of local music industries and economic developments in Liverpool, Manchester and Sheffield, and in the development of local cultural strategies and creative industries mapping. She was a founding director of the Northwest Culture Observatory, and her extensive research and policy engagement is part of her recent role as UKRI Policy Fellow on Cultural Placemaking with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. She's also a co-investigator on the ESRC Strategic Hub for Local Policy Innovation Partnerships, leading the Culture and Place strand. So there is nobody better, really, I think, to be able to frame what Luthfur Rahman is going to be talking about and to lead the questions afterwards. Luthfur Rahman, OBE, made history as the first person of Bangladeshi origin to be elected to Manchester City Council. His journey continued to break new ground as he became deputy leader, another first for Manchester's Bangladeshi community. His leadership was marked by a focus on inclusion, championing the city's cultural richness and spearheading initiatives, many initiatives, one of which led to Manchester's recognition as a UNESCO City of Literature. And I worked with Councillor Rahman across that process, and it was an absolute pleasure to find his commitment to International Mother Language Day and so many of the activities that have flourished under the aegis of the UNESCO brand. I'll also not forget his ability to make challenges to us in board meetings about making sure that we could make what we did reach as many of Manchester's residents as possible. Luthfur has been celebrated as a community champion and honoured with an OBE for his unwavering dedication to public service, inspiring countless others to believe in the difference that they can make in their own communities. Above all, his work stands as a testament to the idea that determination and a belief in the power of community can help anyone to build a brighter and more inclusive future for all. And I'm really delighted now to welcome him to begin tonight's event by speaking. And he's going to speak for about half an hour, at which point he and Abby are going to have a conversation, and then we'll open it up to some questions on the floor. So, Luthfur Rahman, OBE.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your kind words and for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Before we dive in, let me set the scene. If you came here expecting a gripping exposé on the city's bin collections or a thrilling saga about disappearing parking spaces, well, you might be in the wrong place. Tonight, we are skipping the potholes and diving headfirst into something far richer. The heartbeat, the spirit, the very soul of Manchester. This isn't about council paperwork. It's about passion, resilience, and a city that refuses to just exist. It insists on thriving. So buckle up, because if you think you know Manchester, you haven't heard this story yet. Let me start with an observation. Manchester is a city that thinks a table is for dancing on. That's a quote from Mark Radcliffe. And honestly, it could be our city slogan. You might say our city's unofficial motto is why walk when you can dance your way through life. This truly captures the spirit this city demands. And I feel especially close to this city's spirit because my story is deeply woven into Manchester's fabric. From the paddy fields of Bangladesh to the corridors of civic leadership in Manchester, my journey has been shaped by graft and gratitude, hope and resilience. It stands as a testament to what this city does for those who call it home. My earliest memory of England is stepping off a plane in 1980, a shy child in the arm of loving parents, carrying nothing except hope, courage, and dreams in their battered suitcase. Manchester, especially Longsight, opened its arms to us and became the place that, for over 45 years, has helped build the character standing before you now. I grew up in a no-nonsense family, where hard work and togetherness were not just slogans, they were lifelines. My dad did shifts on the factory floors and in busy restaurant kitchens. My mother, 3 brothers and 2 sisters, showed me what resilience, humour, and loyalty looked like each and every day. My classroom was the bustling high streets of Longsight, the sanctuary of our local library, the energy of leisure centres and football pitches, and above all, the endless lessons learned from Manchester's people. People from every walk of life, every faith, every story that shaped me. Through the good times and the hard knocks, Manchester formed me from a wide-eyed boy into a businessman, financial advisor, neighbour, and ultimately a public servant with a duty to give something back to the place that made me. If you know your history, you know Manchester never follows a script. The first railway, splitting the atom, computers, suffragettes, Oasis, factory records, pioneers, rebels, stubborn geniuses. We pioneered public libraries, became home to the world's first stored program computer, began the first football league, offered the world the suffragettes and the Smiths, one for rights and the other one for rainy day playlists. We have even been called the belly and guts of the nation. That's George Orwell for you, proof that Manc pride goes way back. And dare I say it, perhaps the birthplace of the queue. Nothing galvanizes Mancunians quite like lining up for cups of tea. But bravado only tells half the story. We have seen tough times as well. Deindustrialization, the city centre bombing, the decades when optimism seemed as damp as our weather, all tested us. If cities could do therapy, Manchester would have held weekly sessions back in the 80s. Yet every setback became a springboard, because when Manchester is told That'll never work here. The city tends to take it as a challenge, not a warning. Persistence is not just a virtue here. It is a survival strategy with a remarkable soundtrack. That persistence says something deeper about what it means to belong here and what place truly means to all of us. So what exactly do we mean when we talk about place? At its heart, this is more about than physical location. Place is where a city, a neighborhood, or even a single street corner comes alive with meaning. It is where memories are made, emotions are felt, and identities shaped. For me, place has always been personal. I am still that boy trailing brothers through back alleys of Longsight, listening to my father's tales after late night shifts, borrowing my first library book in a city that sometimes felt immense, yet always found room for newcomers. The Manchester I witnessed growing up in the 80s had factories closing, opportunities evaporating, but community holding on through hard times. It was there, in that landscape of struggle and solidarity, that my roots grew deep and my belief in placemaking took shape. Now, come with me for a moment. Picture the physical side of place. Bricks and mortar, roads and parks, canals, lighting, benches, trees. These things give us our backdrop. They matter, they do. No one thrives in a crumbling city or a street that feels unsafe after dark. Yet place means so much more than structures. Place is where our hearts and minds form a bond with our surroundings. It's that feeling as you walk down your street that everything is just right. Maybe the corner shop owner greets you by your name. Birds sing in the trees above. Sunlight cuts across the pavement in a familiar way. You simply know you are home. Scientists sometimes call this place attachment, meaning that when people form deep bonds with places, it feeds mental health, builds resilience, and gives a profound sense of security. People who feel tied to their neighborhoods look after them, join in with community life, and fight for the future around them. But this is not just how we feel as individuals. Place is a mosaic made up of collective experience. Think about the markets, alive with neighbors swapping stories, or the vibrant noise and color of a street festival. Place is about people coming together, children playing in parks, the elderly chatting on the benches, the street musician who always finds a way to make a great Thursday feel like a celebration. The best places encourage us to linger, to chat, to feel less alone. This is where place becomes both fragile and mighty. A city can be beautiful from a distance, but if it is cold or unwelcoming, if it lacks true connection, it feels empty. People might live there, but they do not really belong. They do not fight for it or celebrate it. They do not call it home. Real placemaking is about crafting spaces people wish to be part of, where everyone feels seen, valued, and included. So how do we achieve this? Turning space into place starts with listening. We talk with people who are rooted here and those who are newly arrived, shaping places with them, never just for them. Placemaking is a conversation, nourishment. It's not a one-way presentation. It thrives on genuine diversity and genuine inclusion. The most alive places are where different cultures, generations, and stories mingle freely. Place flourishes where there is adaptability. The finest places change and welcome new life, from markets and playtimes to protest and remembrance. Above all, it survives through ongoing care. A park ignored by a city quickly loses its magic. A library left unloved loses its spirit. Neuroscientists tell us our brains carve out mental maps of places that comfort and anchor us, becoming a lasting part of who we are. Anthropologists remind us that the rituals and repeated gatherings of daily life stitch the ongoing story of place. Jan Gehl, the celebrated urbanist, said that great places invite us to pause, to observe, to slow down and really connect, not just pass through. In Manchester, place lives in every sense. It can be the scent of fresh bread at the bakery, the clang of the tram along St. Peter's Square, laughter floating from festival tents in Piccadilly Gardens, the hush of reading in Whitworth Park on autumn afternoons, or families celebrating together in the streets. Place is what happens when we come together. It's about turning bricks into belonging and roads into relationships. It grows from daily gestures and is heard in the heartbeat of the city and seen in its shared spirit. Community is where this notion of place really finds its voice. Think about the warmth and life in our community centres, the after-school clubs, the elders' circles, the newcomers who always receive a welcome. The camaraderie on the pitches of our local sports club is where friendships are forged on rainy Saturday and Sundays, and where young people learn what it means to work together, lose gallantly and win generously. Knitting clubs and book circles become spaces for hands and hearts to work in unison, sharing both stories and worries in equal measure. The neighbourhood coffee shop. The neighbourhood coffee morning is the lifeline for so many, where the kettle is always on and the burdens are never shouldered alone. During Sunday morning litter picks, you see neighbours roll up their sleeves and take pride in turning our alleys into places everyone treasures. Small gestures, like a smile at the bus stop, a borrowed ladder, a casserole brought over in hard times, quietly transform the ordinary streets around us into something special. These are often overlooked rituals and magic that build real place, and Manchester is overflowing with them. This is why every project I've helped to lead, from home to Aviva Studios, is rooted in the belief that connection, joy, and identity will last far longer than any bricks or mortar. At the end of the day, place is not simply where we live, it is where we belong. Understanding what place truly means is only half of our story. The other half is how Manchester used culture, not as a nice to have, but as the driving force in our renewal. Culture became our compass, our lever, and our refusal to let decline write our ending. I saw the power of culture up close in my own journey. And when I became a councillor in 2008, I felt a unique responsibility to the spirit that had kept Longsight alive for people like me. The lessons I brought from business, community, faith, and family shaped my belief that culture could unify and connect a city. Years of post-industrial struggle did not defeat Manchester's spirit. We used art, music, sport, literature, and most importantly, celebration to reignite pride and imagination. When disaster struck our city centre, we could have simply rebuilt in steel and glass. But instead we invested in festivals, galleries, food, nightlife, and vibrancy. Everything that gives place its pulse. The Commonwealth Games in 2002 wasn't just a sporting event, it was a cultural moment signalling Manchester is back. It ignited civic pride and helped package the city for new economic and social opportunities. Important investments followed, from BBC relocating to Media City to universities partnering with creative industries that reinforce culture's central role in placemaking. Our libraries became engines of knowledge and social mobility. Our parks turned into stages for music and neighbourly pride, and our community gatherings stretched across every postcode. Let me share some living moments of this journey with you. A few years back, First Street was more motorway slip road than destination. Not much to look at, unless you fancied exhaust fumes and the distant hope of seeing a dog walker. I watched with admiration as home took root. What a vision. A place for film, theatre, art, and most crucially, for random Mancunians to rub shoulders and maybe talk or argue over a coffee. Today, you'll see everything from Bollywood cinema to experimental dance. Proof Manchester's soul is big enough for every story. Ancoats, once the world's first industrial suburb, then an epic ghost town. Halle St. Peter's brought music and youth back to its old heart. When the decade-old organ struck up again, you could almost hear the city sigh with relief. We're not done yet. They say music can change the world. In Ancoats, it changed a postcode. Now, let's talk about Aviva Studios, home of Factory International at St. John's. When first pitched, some people said, that's a factory-sized risk. And on more than one sleepless night, I agreed. But take risks, said Mark Twain. If you win, you'll be happy. If you lose, you'll be wise. I'll let you guess which camp most city leaders prefer, though. I can safely say that my diary was 20% creativity and 80% contingency plans. I led this one to start to finish. Relentless meetings, funding dramas, public debate. Surely people cried. There are safer investments than world-class arts festivals. But the vision was clear, a world-leading inclusive home for imagination, where a festival tent could share a postcode with future Nobel Prize winners. And Deansgate traders might just bump into global stars on a lunch break. Now, walk with me through Aviva Studios. Young graduates run light shows. Community groups rehearse in world-class halls. Art, tech, and business mix in ways the old cotton barons couldn't ever have imagined. Manchester proved that the best places aren't built. They're staged, year after year, with everyone invited. The role of our universities and their students must be celebrated. Manchester's universities are at the heart of our city's placemaking. And it is their students coming from every corner of Britain and the globe who pour new energy into our neighbourhoods, museums, galleries and festivals. One of the reasons students choose Manchester, both from home and abroad, is because our universities understand that culture is as vital as any curriculum. Where else could you study beside the Whitworth Gallery's celebrated exhibitions? Take inspiration from the European award-winning Manchester Museum, marvel at the science and wonder of Jodrell Bank, or participate in the projects of Creative Manchester. Scan that for the newsletter. At the very centre of encouraging ideas and curiosity to shape not just campus life, but the very city around them. Tonight's talk is a testament to this spirit. Creative Manchester have brought us together, connecting the university to the city, students to communities, and ideas to action. So it's only right that I thank Creative Manchester for their vision and energy, and for ensuring the university remains a driving force in Manchester's ever-evolving story of place. Their commitment to placemaking reminds us that the best cities never stand still. They welcome, they create, they inspire future chapters with each new student, exhibition, and conversation. Well, we can take pride in these flagships. Yet, for me, our city's soul is found in smaller havens. I always believed a city is only as good as its libraries, and the measure of its success is down to the number of members that the libraries have. Through the years of austerity, I championed them, because as Neil Gaiman put it, if you cut libraries, you silence the voice of the past and damage the future. On any rainy day, in any Manchester library, you can see stories starting, CVs being written, and children discovering the world for the first time. We're famous for our rain, but thank goodness for our green havens, the lungs of the city, from Plattfields Park to Heaton Park, to the little wild corners along the Mersey. As a council, I made it a priority to protect and revive them. Kids play, elders stroll, runners, well, they run. And the city breathes. Cities, like people, need breathing room, said Jan Gale. And here, Manchester's green spaces breathe deeply. I also want to take you to Abraham Moss, a microcosm of Manchester. Every language, faith, and hairstyle represented. If the pool's seen some dodgy front crawls, it's also seen some lifelong friendships begun. What makes Manchester's spirit sparkle is also its festival calendar. Diwali in the square, lanterns, sweets, and Bollywood remixes making town hall pillars shake. Hanukkah in St. Anne's, candles, song, and a sense that light always returns. Eid in Rusholme with samosas and smiles, and the world's friendliest traffic jams. Christmas markets, now a Manchester tradition, spreading across the city with bustling stalls and festive lights each year, bringing people together in the true spirit of Christmas. Pride Parade, when Canal Street becomes a rainbow river of inclusion and glitter. Caribbean Carnival, Chinese New Year, Yom Kippur, Ramadan, Vaisakhi, Easter, Holi, Ascension Day. If you can name it, we celebrate it. Every festival is a lesson in joy. Proof that placemaking means taking the world's culture seriously and sometimes not ourselves. When Manchester became a UNESCO City of Literature, it meant more to me than a global accolade or a line in a brochure. I had the privilege and responsibility of leading the city's application in partnership with both our universities. For me, this wasn't just about heritage or reputation. It was about hope, health, and the belief that words can heal and transform. I championed this bid because I've seen time and again that stories save lives. In our city, books have been bridges for new arrivals learning English, ladders for young people climbing out of disadvantage, and lifelines for those struggling with loneliness or mental health. Our libraries aren't just buildings, they're sanctuaries of connection. During times of isolation, they provide access to information, comfort, and even warmth. Poetry nights, reading groups, literary festivals, these aren't sideshows. They are where Manchester's spirit of solidarity, empathy, and are fostered. We're the city of Burgess, Gaskell, Cisse, Winterson, and thousands of spoken word nights, schoolbook drives, library outreach vans, and fledgling authors scribbling in cafes or youth centres. So when UNESCO asked us what made Manchester different, we said, this is a city where words have always had room to breathe and where they are not used only to entertain or educate, but to lift people up. As Jeanette Winterson puts it, Manchester, a city where words have room to breathe. For me, the real City of Literature isn't about the old or big names. It's about the child discovering Roald Dahl for the first time in Longsight, the refugee family learning words for hope on the shelves of Central Library, or the pensioner finding friendship in a poetry group in North Manchester. It's about the research showing how just a few minutes of shared reading can improve well-being, lower stress, and increase happiness. Now let me talk about the Culture Awards and why I started them. Starting the Culture Awards was my way of spotlighting the true engine room, the unsung, the ambitious, the proud. On awards night, you'll see artists from Moss Side to Moston pitching new collaborations, activists networking with business leaders, yes, sometimes nervously. It's about the proud, the shy, the legendary, and the absolute up-and-coming. And of course, no Manchester celebration is complete without Dave Moutry, who is Manchester's Director of Culture, dancing on tables. Because frankly, that's the Manchester way. Awards are far more than applause. They're for confidence, partnership, and new dreams. All this is not only about the grand moments. You can see place in the everyday. Family picnics in Alexandra Park, teens skating in Cathedral Gardens, early morning Tai Chi in Whitworth Park. These are the scenes of the city healing itself. Every space, no matter how small, becomes Manchester's shared front garden, open to everyone. If you ask me why Manchester succeeds, the truth is simple. Here, cynicism never passes for realism. Whenever anyone says, that'll never work here, we take it as a challenge, even a friendly dare to prove them wrong. As Tony Wilson famously said, in Manchester, we do things differently. Our greatest strength is bringing people together, whether on the dance floor, in the library, or in the park. This spirit of connection and community, more than anything, keeps us moving forward together. Manchester's work of placemaking, or turning belonging into something both fierce and joyful, is never finished. The future will be greener, more inclusive, and just as loud as ever. The next first for this city is out there. A child getting their first library card, a neighbour welcomed at a festival, or a new musician's debut. Thank you for letting me share my story, woven with Manchester's. And if you catch me dancing on a table at home or Aviva Studios, just remember, that is exactly what we built them for. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you.
I need to get the pose right here, I think.
Right, okay, yes. We've both been told not to woman or mansplain, so here we go. So thank you, John, for introducing both Luthfur and I, and thank you also for your words just then, which we'll discuss in conversation. As we heard earlier, there will be some time for Q&A shortly, and I'll let you know when we open it up to the floor. But first, some comments and questions to you. I'm a professor of cultural policy. I've done a lot of policy engagement, most recently with national government, but over the last sort of 25 years in different guises, regional, local and national. And so I'm very familiar with those kind of harder edge narratives and policy rationales for the role of culture in placemaking. It's really refreshing to hear you talk about things from quite a different perspective. So, you know, the journeys that people have when they move into the city, whether it's physically, whether they're coming to the city for the first time, or whether it's through time, through their lives. And I just think, there's so much richness in there. But because I'm an academic, I'm going to slightly draw on some of the things that you mentioned in terms of the kind of the theory, the concepts that we work with in thinking about culture and placemaking. You mentioned a number of different theorists, actually. Jan Gehl, favourite of mine, you know, life between buildings. And there were also echoes of the geographer Doreen Massey and Raymond Williams. And, you know, I'm taking this privilege as somebody at the University of Manchester, a knowledge institution. So I just wanted to think about the implications of those. The idea of place attachment was really important too. And the way that this garnered within neighbourhoods kind of care for each other. And it made me think of some of the theoretical frameworks that are kind of useful to inform policy and planning. One of them is this idea of mediated conviviality. You also mentioned parks a gazillion times, which made my heart leap. I published a book on parks as cultural policy spaces and spaces for everyday participation just recently. And in that, I talk a little bit about the idea of mediated conviviality, which comes from an academic over at Leeds, Anna Barker, And it's about those kind of brief encounters that people have. And I think a lot of what you were saying was, we need these spaces for these brief encounters that are somehow mediated, and parks are really great for that, because you can just have that sort of fleeting eye contact with somebody, or you can have a longer term, more routine engagement. But it gives us something where we can recognise difference, we encounter other people, and we feel that we are alive and a part of humanity. And it also gives us a bit of space for conflict and agonism, which is quite important as well. It's part of the way that we practice public space. I will get to a question in a moment, you'll be pleased to know. But one of the things that I think that might help to encapsulate some of that thinking is this idea of infrastructure. And I've been doing some thinking about that myself. And the stories that you were telling us also reminded me strongly of Eric Klinenberg's Palaces for the People, where he finds out through doing some research in Chicago that during a heat wave, the neighborhoods in Chicago, even when they, so there's a very, very difficult heat wave, and it really impacted on the whole of the city, and there were deaths from overheating and so on. But he found that the neighborhoods with the lowest deaths, but which also had other statistical conditions like poverty, violence, poor housing, exclusion, and so on, they somehow seemed more resilient. And he was asked the question why, and he found out it was because they had those parts of social infrastructure, those, block parties, parks, church groups, the barber shops, all the kinds of things that you were talking about, they're kind of everyday places. And it wasn't that in the other neighbourhoods other people didn't care about each other, didn't look out for each other. It was just that there were those spaces for encounter and spaces for interaction. So I feel that, there's a lot in what you've just been talking about that reminds me around kind of theories of cultural infrastructure and social infrastructure. So my question to you is about what this means, do you think, for kind of planning in a sustainable future for Manchester and the kind of culture and cultural spaces that you're talking about? What does it mean for new neighbourhoods or for changes to existing neighbourhoods? We've seen a huge amount of development. We've got the cranes up there, and there are buildings going up all the time. How can we plan in this kind of cultural infrastructure into new housing and so on? So I just wanted to have a bit of response, and then I'll follow up again with another question about cultural infrastructure.
Well, I think I gave 3 examples of how we've used culture as an anchor to develop real neighbourhoods in real place. I think in Manchester, what we discovered fairly early on is that power of using culture and arts and an anchor institution to really create place and a sense of belonging, because that's absolutely crucial. And I think that's where a lot of cities fall behind. And I think right across the board, if you look at the new neighbourhoods that have been created, we had this chat earlier on. So, for example, Spinningfields, the St John's area, the Northern Quarter, all of these have their own distinct identities. Yet they connect people. They connect people. People feel like that these are places where they can belong, where they have ownership, where they feel valued, where they feel seen, and where there is that social infrastructure and that cultural infrastructure that gives you that sense of belonging. And that's really that's been really crucial in terms of our resurgence from a declining industrial city to what we have become now, and the accolades that we're getting across the globe in terms of one of the best cities to live in and one of the most visited cities is because of how we have not only created neighbourhoods from a top-down approach, but we've actually really listened. And it's that conversation element of it, having that conversation, making sure that we are designing places with people, not just for them. And that's been a crucial instrument in Manchester. And I've talked about the big flagships in the city centre, but I think we can see evidence of that in our neighbourhoods in every part of the city, where those community infrastructure, whether that's the local football club or the community centre, or the housing office or the local library, all of those create that sense of place and that sense of belonging. And without that, I don't, you asked in your evaluation of it, you said that, you gave that example where even though there was poverty in the area, that people it saw less of an impact of the disaster that it faced. And equally, as I said in my presentation, if people feel part of their neighbourhood, if they feel that they're valued and they have helped in designing that place, then they feel ownership of it, then they protect it, then they celebrate it. And if you don't feel part of it, if you just create buildings and bricks and mortar, and you put shiny buildings in a place that doesn't connect to people, then it's never going to work. So one of the Factory International Aviva Studios, for example, it's a huge building. It cost us 3 times what we started off for it to cost, but on its own, it means nothing. You could spend the millions of pounds that we have. It only works when people feel like it's theirs, people feel like it was being designed with them in mind, with them in conversation, and that they own it and they feel valued and seen in it. And that's why, that's how it will work. It's equally, same applies to home, and the same applies to the Halle St. Peter's as well, and Cutting Room Square. And if you look at the neighbourhood there, and how people have really created a distinct identity around that neighbourhood, and that is what, in my view, is how you connect people to places, that place attachment element of it. And I'll give you an example, actually. So if you go on holiday to a 5-star, really nice hotel room, and it's great, you're there in a hotel room, how do you feel when you get back to your house? And it may not be the greatest, you may have a broken headboard and a tacky lamp and everything. The elegance and the grandeur of that 5-star do not make you feel the same as your home does. And I think everybody in this audience, you can relate to that. You've been out there and you've been on holiday somewhere, but when you come back home, you say, I think everyone says this, nowhere feels like home. And that is place attachment, and that's really important. That's how we make place and neighbourhoods that are vibrant, that are places for people. Ultimately, it's about people. It's not about buildings or bricks and mortar.
Thank you. I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that. And I think I've wanted to become a fake planner for some time now, and I'd be interested to know more, and possibly not from this conversation, but just in general around kind of the planning regime within Manchester. You've talked a lot about the city centre, and you've talked about big shiny buildings primarily, and spaces where people might feel that they can belong. But statistical data, research, including research I've been involved in, shows that not everybody feels that they belong in a big shiny building. So actually what happens in those neighbourhoods that are further away, that are not connected through transport infrastructure? Are there ways that we can plan in, or how do we actually find ways to support people to feel at home in their homes, but to feel that their homes are 5-star hotels?
I think there's 2 bits to that question. I think the first bit is, you're right, in terms of, does everyone feel at home in these shiny buildings? Do they feel like it's been developed and made for them? And I think that's the challenge, and that's the question for Manchester and for these institutions, to make sure that they do become welcoming, that they do become a part of the mental fabric of an individual, of a resident that lives in Manchester. And that's the challenge for them. And I think in terms of what the vision for the city when we designed these places was for them to be exactly that, places for people. Mm-hmm. I accept that maybe there is some discrepancy and some challenge around making sure that that really happens. But as I said in my presentation, the true placemaking is the little havens in our neighbourhoods, in our communities. Is that grassroots upwards that then has to connect you to the bigger institutions in the city, and the bigger institutions have to connect to our neighbourhoods. One of the things that I did when I was the executive member for culture, it was, we're not going to be waiting in Manchester for someone from Wythenshawe or Harper Hay to come into a building in the city centre. We want those institutions, whether it's factory, home, the Halle, anywhere else, to go into our neighbourhoods and work with our communities so that they feel that they have ownership in those institutions in the city and that they have ownership in the city. And I think we've done that to an extent. It's an ongoing process, and I'm never going to say that we're done yet, and I think there's a lot more work to do around that. But if you go into a neighbourhood, whether that's in Longside or in Moss Side, that's where the true spirit of community and place is felt. And you can see it in the everyday, you can see it when you walk in those neighbourhoods. And it is those small gestures that I mentioned. It's that small gesture that we are part of the same community. So when there is an issue, when somebody is facing hardship, it just takes a smile, it just takes just asking if you're okay, if you need a casserole or some food or something, and it's that, and we see that in abundance in our neighbourhoods, and that's what really connects me to this city, and I love it. I don't want to go anywhere else from here, because that spirit of this city is so alive in our neighbourhoods, and I think there is still a piece of work to do to connect that to the big developments in the city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and thanks for your careful response. I want to, again, having been involved in and with policy over the last however many years, I want to ask about the kind of the difficult question of evidence here. So we have this idea that policy is based on evidence, and that the right decisions will be made if you get the right kinds of evidence. And literally for national policy, you need to make the business case in particular terms, those kind of harder-edged metrics that placemakers are sometimes looking to achieve, the increase in GVA and the productivity measures and so on. But you've given us some other metrics, which I think are really interesting. I love the idea that artists and cultural makers are kind of the true architects of the city. I like very much the idea that we don't measure the number of floors on a new skyscraper that's kind of coming up into the skyline as a measure of success, but we look at the number of people enrolled in the libraries, or maybe the number of people that are dancing on tables. And there was kind of a lot of sort of emotion in how you understand Manchester as a successful place, a livable city, that is kind of qualitatively, captured through research, but is a problem for those policymakers that feel that that need to make a business case based on those kinds of measures, the cost-benefit analysis. So I just wondered if you had any stories for us about ways that, with your work, as lead for culture and deputy leader, how have you made the case? And can you give us any examples of making the case for those big projects or for other kinds of programming? What sort of stories have you told, or have you used different types of evidence? And what's been the result of the policy interventions from that?
Well, I think there's a lesson to be learned here. I think there's clearly a disconnect in terms of decision makers. And I think when you come to decision makers, and when it comes to quantifying that evidence level, I think we sometimes miss the emotional aspect of it, and we're looking at we are too focused on the numbers and the hard data, and sometimes the wrong numbers and the wrong hard data and the wrong measures. Like I said, for me, the measure of success isn't the number of floors or the number of skyscrapers going up in the city. Those buildings is what those numbers of floors and those skyscrapers are doing for the people that live in this city or the people that visit this city. Equally, a city's success for me is, as I said, the number of library cards that are issued, but also the number of people that are able to access a lunch, the number of young people that are not having to struggle to get a school lunch, the number of people that are not having to go to a food bank. Those are the things that for me, that is a measurement of a city's success. And if all of these buildings and all of the infrastructure that we build in the city does not help to alleviate that inequality and that poverty, or that discrepancy that we have in the city, then it doesn't work for me. And I have found in the past, when we have looked at making a case for investment, making a case for development or for projects that support that element of social mobility and social justice. I think decision makers sometimes do not understand it, don't see it in the same way. And I think Manchester's unique in the sense that in terms of the city council's decision makers, for example, there's been over the years this culture embedded within them to be able to see beyond the academic evaluation and start looking at the human side and the human cost to the actions that we take, whatever that may be, whether that's in development, whether that's in housing, whether that's in providing education for our children. And that's really crucial. And I think there needs to be a piece of work around some form of training or education with people who are sitting, and I understand there's a lot of pressure and there's limited resources, and people have to really make sure that the investment really delivers the outcomes that they want to deliver. But we're not seeing the outcomes. We're sometimes blind to the outcomes, and I think there needs to be a reckoning that it is beyond those academic structures.
Yeah, well, not all academics, but perhaps, the economists in particular. So I mean, I have to agree that there's much to be gained through trying to understand and share outcomes. And I note that idea of Manchester having a less risk averse and more kind of trusting into the future culture of policy making and decision making seems to be, something that it does have in its favour. I wanted to turn to that idea of the kind of character, the culture of Manchester. You've painted the picture of Manchester's swagger and bravado. I've been working in the city for 20 years now, and it's palpable. Not just when Oasis come to town. And I've lost count of the amount of times that I've heard the word pioneering, and the amount of firsts that Manchester does, and the times that I've heard that Manchester does things differently. But what really stood out for me was, I think you mentioned this idea of cities and Manchester almost needing its own therapy session. It's kind of a reflexivity that you wouldn't normally think of being important to how a city kind of looks after itself, really, and provides means for the care for itself. And some of that, I would argue, is through opportunities and access to social and cultural infrastructure and human connectivity. And that seems to be incredibly important in times of hardship. And I just wondered if you had some lessons from Manchester. What can we learn here for other places that are going through similar hardships, or in many cases worse hardships? What form might this therapy, this reflexivity take? And what are the other lessons that are transferable from Manchester as a city to other places in the world?
I think is the point you made about our attitude to risk. And in the 80s, when I was growing up, the city was in decline. There wasn't very many opportunities. Where I grew up, there was hardly any opportunities. And two things could have happened. We could have gone into therapy and accepted defeat and decline. But as I've said, and you can look back in history in terms of this city and how it's reinvented itself over centuries, it doesn't stand still. And I think that therapy is where we take adversity as a challenge, and we take the notion that things will not work as a challenge, and that then gives us the motivation to be able to reinvent ourselves and regenerate. And I think that's what's happened in Manchester since the 80s, and culture has been an integral part of that. And you can look around anywhere in the city, whether that's in our local neighbourhoods or elsewhere. And when I talk about culture, we're not just talking about music and arts and theatre and that. We're talking about the takeaway on the A6. We're talking about the corner pound shop on Moston Lane. These are part of the culture of the city, and that is really driving not just the placemaking element of it or the community spirit of it, but the economy of our city. I think that's what we've done, and that's how we take our therapy. So you've seen it in the recent adversities that we faced in Manchester. The arena bomb, other incidents that have happened elsewhere, and you've seen how those cities have responded. And you see every time there's adversity in our city, and even recently with the couple last week, the incident at the synagogue, Manchester just doesn't lie down. It stands up to adversity, and it says we're not going to be defeated. And I think it's that attitude of that we're not going to accept defeat, and we're not going to be divided. We're going to make a city for our residents. We're going to make it better. That is what I think really makes Manchester, is having an attitude towards risk and adversity that I've not seen anywhere else in the world.
So far, so celebratory, and I don't want to end this questioning with a negative note, but you have talked about the winning mindset a lot. Are there any losers in this, and if so, how would you help them in your ideal, with your policy wand or your opportunity?
I'm glad you've asked that question about the winning mindset, and I'll tell you why there's a winning mindset. So I'm a migrant. I came here in the 80s. I was 3 years old when I came here with my dad and my brothers and sisters and my parents. And I've seen my parents struggle to make ends meet. I've seen my community struggle. I've seen my neighbours struggle. I've seen my local school, the roof leaking, the playground being sold off. And I've seen all of that adversity and the lack of opportunity growing up. And we could have done two things, and it's not just me, it's many Mancunians. We could do two things. We could have been affected by that adversity and that challenge and just cowered away. But we didn't. And that's why, even though I know that there are challenges in this city, and even though I know that there is a lot more work to be done, we've got high levels of inequality, we've got deprivation, we've got poverty, we've got neighbourhoods that need real investment. If I look at it, there's two ways of looking at it. If I look at it from that negative lens, we're never going to grow. We're never going to pull ourselves out of that. So we've got to have that positive winning mentality to be able to lift us out of those challenges. I stood in Longside as a councillor because they sold my football pitch to a private developer, right? It wasn't for a private club. Mm-hmm. They put gates on it and locked it away, so I couldn't get in. Right? That was when I was young, but for years that stayed in my mind, and I thought, who locked that gate? And I want to open it up, and I want to make sure that the people that live in this area, the kids that live in this area, are able to use that facility. And it took me a few years before I eventually stood for election. And if you go into Longside now, that is the most vibrant playing fields and community asset in the area. And you have to have that mentality, otherwise you'll just be cowered away and you won't be able to change anything.
Thank you. You mentioned the A word, and that's a key part of placemaking, isn't it, really? And cultural planning and those kinds of methodologies, is that you identify where your assets are, and your decisions are assets based. They're not in deficit. They're not what is not here, and they're about. So I would say that, rather than it just being about winning at all costs, it's about recognising what is of value to communities and how to understand that and to respect it. So I agree. I'm carefully steering around the problems with money and austerity and all of those things, and maybe there'll be some questions from the floor about those kinds of things, particularly in the cultural sector, but pretty much everywhere that is a non-discretionary service, and some services in the local authority. And I'm just going to swoop slightly to a different geography for my kind of last question, which is, again, what can we learn from Manchester over the years, or what might be important guidance and advice, shall we say, for a national level? I know we've also completely left out devolution from this conversation, but maybe that's for another day. What would be the advice for national policymakers, particularly in the role of culture and cultural placemaking?
Quite a lot actually, but I'm not sure they're going to listen. But I think the point you made about devolution, it's not for another day, it's actually for today. And it's that devolution is crucial. Before devolution, in Manchester, we had a strong belief that you don't make decisions for people, you make decisions with them. You support people, you facilitate, that's our job. As a local council, as elected representatives, or people in positions of leadership, our job isn't to do things for people, is to make sure that we facilitate and we empower them to do that. And we had that approach in our neighbourhoods, and with devolution, what we really wanted was more power to be able to create our own destiny. And I think devolution to an extent, in terms of transport, in terms of policing, in some case health, has improved. I think there's a lot more that we need in terms of devolution, so that power is really handed back to our communities and to our neighbourhoods, and people can make the decisions for themselves, and decision makers act as what they should be, facilitators.